Hi, everybody. Sorry, just checking the chat up here, and it's wonderful to meet all of you people joining us today. And it'll be even better. Debbie, hi. If you're that Debbie, actually, it'll be wonderful when we can all be together to do something like this in the future. But for now, welcome to Alberta Mentoring Partnerships presentation with Derek Peterson on seeing adolescent mental health in full color and his theory of webs of supports. I've heard a lot about you, Derek, and I'm really excited about seeing you in action and learning a lot. Firstly, a land acknowledgement. So it is an unofficial call to action stemming from the 94 calls to action from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We do it to honor that Indigenous peoples have been here since time immemorial, and it's the traditional way to honor the land and people. So we had asked Tanya Taranjo, our lead of Indigenous engagement, to give this land acknowledgement, but she actually just educated me about the importance of all team members to be able to deliver the land acknowledgement, and as it's our collective responsibility to participate in this call to action from the Accord. So this way, non-Indigenous persons and organizations who don't have Indigenous persons on staff can learn about their neighbors and develop their own land acknowledgement. Therefore, we acknowledge that we are on and support mentoring for youth in the traditional territories across Alberta of the many First Nations from Treaties 6, 7, and 8, the Métis of the 8 Alberta settlements, and Inuit people whose footsteps have marked these lands for centuries. Thank you, and thank you for teaching us, Tanya. So, thanks, Derek. Moving on to the main event here. Derek Peterson is an international child youth advocate and the founder of Integrative Youth Development and its measuring instrument, the Student Support Card. Peterson supports youth and adults in measuring, creating, and sustaining developmentally thick ecologies. His full spectrum approach to youth development allows parents, teachers, youth development professionals, practitioners, and researchers to find common ground that exists across most of the current theoretical youth development and effective teaching frameworks. The Harvard Education Review calls Peterson one of America's champions for children and youth. Peterson works to increase the shared responsibility for preparing and protecting children and youth. Since 1999, Peterson has been keynoting conferences, delivering pieces of training and supporting schools, youth programs, drug alcohol reduction efforts, and communities to increase their effectiveness in building resilience in teens. Peterson has worked in 23 Alberta communities and a greater number of Alberta individual school sites. In 1992, we were just talking about this, he cycled across Alberta on a trans-hemisphere bike ride. He has worked in the far northern parts of Alberta, as well as the urban areas and places in between. Please welcome our honorary Albertan and child youth advocate, Derek Peterson.
Yay, Sarah! Yay, Sarah! Well, good morning, everybody, and good afternoon for those of you in the Central Time Zone. I see some folks in the chat who are from Louisville, and I see some folks from Alaska, so it's still earlier morning out there. So I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to get this party started here. So, folks, we call this the full color web of support. And the work is integrative youth development. What we do is we've learned to take the best of all the research and all the data sets. There's a lot of competing frameworks out there, a lot of competing programs. And what we've been able to do is take the best of them and put it in a story where a busy superintendent can learn this story in about 7 minutes, or a busy faith community leader can learn this story in about 8 minutes, 7 minutes, or a minister in a Canadian province, or a state or federal senator in the United States, or a dad who just drops his son off at Head Start. It's about 7 minutes. And so we talk a lot about giving kids wings, and that's about their freedom and about their self-agency and to be able to make a difference in the world. And so usually when we're together, which is my favorite thing, you don't get to hear me talk. We educe this. We pull it out of you because you know this already. Everybody on this webinar, there's about 240 of you plus. This is not new to you, but I hope what it is a language that you can use to describe to somebody what you already do that's working. And so back at a little college, I went to a college called St. Olaf College in Minnesota. It's a scan. Jeg snakker litt norsk. I forstår litt norsk. I speak a little Norwegian. And I read this the first time I was exposed to Tolstoy and his book Anna Karenina. And the very first line of that book, you guys, is happy families are all alike. Every unhappy family is unhappy in its own way. And that was 1979 when I read that quote, and I thought, no, that's not true. No, happy families are all different, and unhappy families are all the same. Unhappy families are poor. Unhappy families are having trouble with the law. Unhappy families don't have enough food. Unhappy families have a lot of stress and discomfort or even dysfunction in their lives. And yet that quote haunted me. And I spent my lifetime trying to figure out what Tolstoy meant, and I think I got a story for you today, which will show you what I think he meant. Usually, right now, we'd be passing out balloons, we'd be bopping balloons around, and there's a whole bunch of you guys connecting. Of course, in this COVID world, we don't get to do that. We still are doing trainings like that, and we just have done some actually in Alberta. But we're using gloves and social distancing, and it's okay. It's better than nothing, but we got a lot to learn still about how to do experiential education during this time of COVID. What you're going to hear me talking about a lot is a full spectrum approach, which means seeing kids in full color instead of black and white. And seeing kids in black and white is typically a deficit. Problem-centered view of youth. A kid is incorrigible. A kid has broken the law. A kid is depressed. A kid is contemplating suicide. A kid is smoking or vaping. A kid is doing something that we adults don't want them to do. And what I would like to invite you to do is to not see kids in black and white, but to be more likely to see them in full color. And when you start seeing kids in full color, that's when we see that kids' lives change and our work in programs and faith communities and schools matters more. And so who am I? I think you need to know my biases. You just heard Sarah talk about my trans-hemispherian bicycle ride attempt. It was a tandem. My first wife and I pedaled about 11,000 miles, and we did most of Canada. So I was raised rural. Right now I'm talking to you from our family farm in southeastern North Dakota in the Red River Valley. So our river flows to Winnipeg. I lived aboard a sailboat for a few years. I didn't own a television for 23 years of my life, and I really don't quite like the medium, but there is one in my house now. I've walked 2,000 miles of the Pacific Crest Trail. That's just I like to be wild and free. I founded my first youth center when I was 15 years old with the mayor of my small town and the chief of police. We turned an old jail in Moose Lake, Minnesota, into a teen center that I had to monitor. You'll hear my dog bark periodically. I was a Big Brother in Big Brothers Big Sisters program for 9 years. And while I was leading my staff in Alaska, 7 of the 16 members of my staff also became Bigs. And I'm very proud of that. And we can talk a little bit more about that if you're interested about why I did that. Mostly, just to let you know, is because a lot of my staff said, no, I don't work. I work with kids professionally. I don't have time to work with them as a community member. And it's like, you got that wrong. You got that backwards. Yes, we do work with youth professionally, and we are also part of this community, and we have to take off our professional hats and go be a big brother, big sister, because you know what? If we don't model what we teach, we're teaching something else. And I'm very proud that my staff loved it, and they loved the kids that they were anchoring. I was on the Zach Gordon Teen Club for a board of directors for 9 years. I am a counselor. I have a master's degree in counseling. Got it in the mid '80s. I really never used it much, but I have worked with adjudicated youth, and I've worked with drug and alcohol treatment early in my career in the '80s, early '80s. But be honest, wasn't very good at it, and so I did something else with my life. The work that you're seeing is in No Child Left Behind. That's an American law that was written in the early 2000s. It's still in ESSA, the federal legislation, except it's funded more broadly. The reason I can talk to you today about this is I got an earmark from my patron, Senator Ted Stevens, of about $2 million a year for a long time, and I could hire really smart people, and that's why I get to talk to you today. I was Alaska Educator of the Year, and I'm not a certified teacher. And I was Alaska Prevention Professional of the Year, and I'm not a social worker or drug alcohol counselor. So that's happened some years ago. I've been on the National School Climate Council for 11 years. We set national school climate policy for schools in every state of the union. I have an office in Victoria, British Columbia, where I do children's rights work. The reason I have an office in Victoria is because the United States has not ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child. We're the only country in the nation has not. And so as an American who's very interested in children's rights and committed to that, and they use the work I'm going to show you in their work at IICRD, I had to come to Canada because you can't do international work when the country you're from, hold citizenship from, hasn't ratified the convention. And then finally, there's many things, but this one is fun to say because I just finished a large National Science Foundation grant with Purdue University, and it was the Purdue University Honors College of Engineering. And I tell you that because when I'm about to show you, some of you are going to say, that's just too touchy-feely, that we can't do that. And I've heard that my whole life, by the way. I'm 60 years old, and I've heard that my work is too touchy-feely for way too long. The trouble is when you get the Purdue Honor School of Engineering to say Derrick's work matters, they're not touchy-feely at the Purdue Honor School of Engineering. They're really not touchy-feely at all. Data matters a lot, and it's a data-driven work. And then when you're funded by the National Science Foundation to the tune of $5 million, there's nothing touchy-feely about the National Science Foundation grant. So I put that in last only to say, yes, it's a good story. But please remember that the data came first. The data came first. The story I'm about to show you only evolved because I had to show a way to show data, make data meaningful to that busy superintendent, to that busy elected official, to that program director, to that faith community leader, to that dad dropping off his daughter at Head Start. This is the work that we do. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I'm going to show you a different camera. And here it is. To all you all in Canada and US and wherever else you're from, I know we got some folks from Brazil and some from Europe. So in the States, at least, when I was a kid, you could judge, believe it or not, somebody's socioeconomic status, their family's socioeconomic status, by the size of the box of crayons that you brought to elementary school to grades 1 through 5. And where I grew up, most folks had limited means, and so you had a box of 8, or boy, like this one, a box of 16. Wow. And of course, there were boxes of 40, and then there was boxes of 64. And those kids, you knew they were rich. They must have had a new car in the driveway, right? And did you ever notice that if you're in grade 1, level 1, and you're coloring your color crayon, your book, your coloring book, and you use your colors, your crayons, at the same rate as the child with 64 has, who needs the sharpener? Like the kid with 8 needs the sharpener. But which box has the sharpener? The box is 64. And that's exactly how our work works with protective factors and learning supports. Is that the more protective factors and learning supports that you have, guess what? You have a sharpener in your life, and that sharpener is simply called self-agency. That sharpener is called resilience. And so in my work, we talk about full spectrum approach, Roy G. Biv, and I'm going to show you right now a napkin talk. And this napkin talk, the reason it's called the napkin talk is because as I travel around the world on airplanes, somebody invariably will ask me, Derek, what do you do for a living? That is such a Western question. When you're in other continents, they don't ask that question. But that's a European and a North American question. And so I say, if I don't want to chat with you, I say, oh, I do systemic school improvement around the world. And we won't talk. They'll leave me alone for the whole plane flight. But often I like to tell people what I do for a living because I'm pretty dang proud of it. And so I'll say this. I can measure how much love your kid feels, and I can correlate that to their probability of success and thriving, and the probability of them avoiding drugs and alcohol, having suicidal thoughts, being incorrigible, breaking the law, carrying a gun to school, not wearing a helmet when you're on a skateboard or on a bicycle, not wearing a personal flotation device if they're on a boat that's on a river or a lake or the ocean, etc. And invariably they'll say, what? What do you do? And I said, I can measure how much love your kid feels, kids you love feel, and correlate that to their thriving and their avoidance of risk behaviors. And they always, I've never had somebody say, not say, don't tell me more. I've never had it. So love, let's start with love. And as a person who loves kids and people, and I've sat across from moms and dads and uncles and aunts and teachers, and they say, I love my kids. I love my kids. And I watch what they're doing and how they're talking and their tone of voice and what's happening in their classroom or in their congregation or in their home. And I'm thinking, I've never seen love look like that before. I'm not too sure that's how love looks, but I'm sure that they're having this feeling of love. They're just not having love look like it typically does. Now, I can't say, no, that's not how it works, because the minute I say that, a gap will form between me and that adult, a chasm that'll never be crossed. No adult wants to be coached on how to love. That I learned 35 years ago. But what we did is we started seeing love as sunshine. And sunshine is everywhere. And as you know, across Alberta, you guys, there's love everywhere in Alberta. And wherever I've worked in the schools, there's tons of love. And so all we did in Alaska with all that money that we were awarded, I didn't get to keep it, guys. I invested it in other smart people. We put that love, sunshine, through a prism. And that prism breaks that love into the spectrum, right? Roy G. Biv. And that's where the story really starts. It starts with red is the rule of 5. Red says every kid in our data set needs at least 5 caring adults in their life. Okay? And these adults can be mom, dad, grandpa, grandma, and uncle. For those of you who are old enough to know of a TV show called The Waltons, if that was in Canada, or other TV shows that shows a loving, intact family, good on you. You won the lottery of life, right? You won the uterine lottery of life. That's what Warren Buffett calls it, the wealthy investor. It can also be mom, dad, who moved from Vancouver to Calgary, 2 teachers and a coach. Is that 5? That's 5. It can also be a dad, 2 teachers, 2 people from the church, synagogue, temple, or mosque. Is that 5? That's 5. It can be a single mom, mom's best friend, a teacher, a big brother, big sister, and somebody from the church, synagogue, temple, or mosque. It can be 2 moms, teacher, school counselor, and a bus driver. It can be a grandpa, grandma, 2 people from a youth serving agency like Boys and Girls Clubs, and a social worker. What's important about my data set is that the rule of 5 is kind of is almost I'll show you a slide in a little bit. It's almost a sacred number where we tip from risk to resilience. Where actually you're almost guaranteed to have a web of support if you have 5 or more adults in your life. Now this is tricky because I keynoted at a conference in Banff. It's about 2,000 teachers before COVID, 5 years ago, I'll say. And the guy right before me, I'm not going to throw anybody under the bus. He's an American. So his keynote was the power of one. The power of one. And he got up there and he had slides and he had research and he was showing the whole audience in Banff that every kid needs one. Every kid needs one. And I thought, wow, okay, he's going to be pretty surprised when he hears my stuff. And we were at the front table, and he must have seen the bill. He must have seen the brochure and the agenda. But when I got up there to speak, I thanked him, and I said, and there's also a rule of 5. And the audience, teachers, they started laughing and like, how's this going to go? So at the very front end of the keynote, I said to the professor, I said, Doctor, 1 is better than 0. That's awesome. Good on you. In your data, did you have any inclination that 2 was better than 1? And he says, of course. Like if you can get 2, that's better than 1. And I said, in your data, any chance that you saw that there are kids who had 3 or 4 were more likely to thrive and avoid risk behaviors than kids with 1? Oh, yes, more is better. And then I said, and then we both kind of jokingly, I didn't mean to throw him under the bus, but I said, what happens sometimes with kids in our world, in Alberta, in the United States, and around the world, is that we get so caught up in all the kids having none that we go for 1 and we celebrate, as we should. But it doesn't mean we should stop. And it doesn't mean we should tell the kids to stop, because the rule of 5 is a better indicator of a child's likelihood to have protective factors and learning supports than just 1 adult in their life. Orange are tangible supports. Tangible supports are strings in this web that are thrown by adults through relationship, through connection. What we have learned in our work is that kids, a lot of surveys will ask a kid if they have how they feel about school, how they feel about their church, how they feel about their synagogue, temple, or mosque, how they feel, and they will do a checklist. I have it or I don't, right? Our survey, and what I would beg you guys to start thinking about is, rather than, or maybe even in addition to asking if the kid has that protective factor or learning support, you're going to ask them who they caught it from. And you've got schools in Alberta doing this right now. If you want to call Honorary, I'm sure Honorary would be proud to tell you what they've done. Back in the day, about 8 years ago, I was all over Sturgeon School District, and we did a lot of work with communities, and it was really fun for the community to see the link between relationship and connection and protective factors and learning supports. The reason these are tangible is because they're easy to measure, or easier to measure, right? Whether a kid has a competent teacher in the classroom, whether a kid feels safe at home, whether a kid has a home to go to, right? At night, whether a kid has a predictable home, whether a kid knows where they're going to be, perhaps where they're going to sleep, perhaps in 6 months. I mean, that's a protective factor. Simply knowing where you're, or having a probability that I'm here today. I'm probably going to be sleeping in my bedroom in 6 months. That's a huge protective factor. So the next color, yellow, is intangible. Intangible are those virtues and values that we all want kids to have. You'll hear sometimes people talk about, oh, Canada, kids these days, they don't have the same values that we had when we were growing up. And what I'm going to show you today is that some kids may not have caught the protective factors or learning supports, the strings of values, because they don't have relationships with people who are throwing them those strings, right? So, because you can imagine, just hear me out. If, let's just say, all of you on this call, all of you have the string of courage. Well, doesn't it inform me as a person who's just meeting you? Doesn't it inform me of your courage by you telling me who you caught it from? You may have caught your courage from your grandma, and that courage may look a lot different than the courage you caught from the football coach or the courage that you caught from your faith community leader. And the more courage you catch from different anchors, different people, guess what? The more bandwidth you have for courage. The more bandwidth you have for courage. And so what I've just shown you here is nurture. This is a part of the nurture-nature debate, right? So this is nurture. This changes dramatically. Kid moves from Calgary to Fishing Lake, right? Where I worked in Alberta, Fishing Lake, Alberta. A kid moves. A kid's mom and dad get a divorce. One of their 5 uncle gets incarcerated. 2 of this kid's family members get put in a long-term drug and alcohol treatment center. This shifts a lot. This web shifts a lot. And what oftentimes we do when this web is shifting, we expect kids to buck it up, right? To buck it up, because now nurture has shifted, but thank goodness we have nature. And nature is green, and it's growing the balloon. So if you were seeing this in live, we would have a balloon on top of this web of support. And don't you know that kids come in different sizes, thank goodness. And the good news in our data sets, 80% of the kids are typical. And we don't call them normal, because no teenager likes to be normal. We call them typical. That just means that they have the innate resilience like most kids, right? Like most kids. 10% of the kids are incredibly big balloons. They're like the Goodyear blimp, right? And we all know, everyone on this call knows a kid who's come, now you see a web, from a thin web, and you know that kid's going to be buoyant. You know that kid's going to be okay. There's just something special, some je ne sais quoi. Some of the medical people call it a hardy personality. You know that kid is going to thrive because there's something special about that kid. And then we all know kids, 10% are small balloons, smaller balloons. And a smaller balloon isn't better. Smaller balloon isn't naughty or nice. All this balloon size means is that the kid is more likely to stay on top of any web they're given. So a big balloon can stay on top of a really thick web all the way down to a thin web. Typical kid, of course, can stay on top of a thick web all the way down to a medium thick web. A young person who has smaller levels of innate resiliency, that those kids would go down. They need a thicker web, otherwise they're going to fall through the cracks. Now, everybody on this call, you know kids, and you've heard people say in youth programs and schools, that kid's going to fall through the cracks. That kid has a likelihood of falling through the cracks. And you go, okay, that's true. But did you ever wonder what the cracks were? Well, I sure did. And because I heard that expression my whole growing up. The cracks are the absence of protective factors. The cracks are the absence of protective factors. Blue are scissors cuts. Blue are scissors cuts. Blue are things that the kid does and that things that happen to the kid that erodes this very web of support. So guess what? Kids who are thickly webbed can handle more scissors cuts than kids who are thinly webbed. If this web was really thin, one scissors cut could disrupt the whole system. If a kid is thickly webbed, guess what? They can handle some things. They can handle some we call these deficit behaviors. They can handle deficit behaviors. And for the sake of this short presentation, I'll just say that deficit behaviors are typically things that teenagers want to keep secret from you and want to keep secret from these anchors. That's typical of what deficit factors are. The next color is indigo. Indigo is caring for the carers, C4C. It means that every one of these anchors needs a web of at least 5 under them. You can't give what you don't have. You need a web. Everybody on this call, if you're loving kids professionally and or non-professionally, you need a web. Why? Because your web is your social capital, just like having money in your wallet that is transferable. You can connect kids that you love and connect with to other adults if you have a social network of your own. And a social network of your own will keep you from burning out, will keep you having a more interesting life, will keep you essentially more resilient, more able to handle anything that comes your way. The trouble is, Canadians and Americans and Western Europeans, we live in a very much a balloon-based culture, right? You need to suck it up. You need to stand alone. In our data sets, the healthiest adults among us who serve the longest have a thick web under themselves. They have a thick web under themselves. It's called caring for the carers. We can talk a little bit about that before the call is over. Finally, violet. Violet is social norms. Social norms. And social norms are winds that blow across this whole web of support. And in some communities in Alberta that I've worked in, these social norms winds are very favorable. In some neighborhoods and schools I've worked in Alberta, it's very easy to build this web and to sustain it. And in some communities I've worked in Alberta and beyond around the world, these winds are like storms, and it makes it really hard to build a web of support for children. And so I'm going to go back to me for a second. And so what you just saw, everybody, is the napkin talk. It's like an elevator speech when someone says, "What do you do, Derek, for a living?" But it's something more important than that. Because in the West, Canada, the US, Western Europe, and other countries where Westerners live, we are so focused on the individual, good on us, we should be, that the web of support that we all live on has become invisible to us. And so I meet very successful people who say, "I did it all myself. I did it all by myself." And I say, I wonder about that, right? Let me ask some questions. And invariably, when I ask successful people how they got where they are, I can educe the web of support right from them. And they'll say, "I never thought of it before. I never thought of it that way before. I always thought I made all these decisions I made all good decisions, and these other people who were competing against me or were in school with me were making bad decisions." A kid with a thick web of support almost can't make a bad choice because there's too much social capital to lose. But a kid with a thin web of support, it's way easy to fall through the cracks. It's way easy to make what we call in the West bad choices because there's not a supportive network there. There's not a web of support there for that kid. And so when I talk to folks, especially professional carers, and they really want to tell me, these kids, I need to be harder on these kids. I need to have tough love because these kids need what I got. I had tough love growing up. These kids need tough love. I tell them they don't need tough love, they need love. And if you can go into your classroom or into your youth program at your church, synagogue, temple, or mosque, and you can measure kids in full color, you might find out that there is an absence of love in the children and the teenagers who most need it, who are falling through the cracks. And it will change the way you go to work in the morning. I promise you. It'll change the lens you have. So I'm going to show you, share my screen. I'm going to go back to the slides. And then in a little bit, I'm going to pause and, well, maybe this is a good time to do it. Let's just do it now. In the chat, I have my chat open. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, type in the chat and I'll take a couple. I see someone typed in Umya, yeah. Good on you. Good on you. Actually, that's Darby. Darby was at my wedding in 1982. So good to have you here, Darby. Any questions, comments, or concerns, Albertans and beyond? Huh. There's one. Oh, there you go, Karina. Sturgeon School Division Wellness Coach. Yeah, I sure enjoyed my time up in your district. I still am connected on Facebook to about 10 of your kids. So it's really fun for me to feel like I have connections there. Well, people are shy or multitasking. So I'm going to keep going because I'm the bummer. Oh, Fishing Lake. All right. Yeah, we did a Lauren Dustow. I stayed with Lauren and Mary when I was in Fishing Lake, and I was there twice or three times over the last 10 years. And he's one of my. I got a great story about Lauren someday. He wove me some sweetgrass braids for protection, and I can say, honest to God, those sweetgrass braids saved 3 children's lives. So that's Fishing Lake. Good on you. So I'm going to keep going. Shout out to Lauren, who I hate COVID because I don't get to see my friends. So here we go. So you saw full spectrum, right? Going from black and white to full color. So our target are these kids. So when you do our data, if you do our data set, you can do that. I can show you how to do this. This is what you get. It's called a snapshot. And this actually measures for this particular teenager how much red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet they have. And it gives us something to talk about. We get to talk about the whole world around this particular whole child. And so rather than focusing on their deficit behaviors or focusing on their parents' financial status or their neighborhood or what's going on in their life, their scissors cuts, we get to start talking about their whole world, right? Their whole world. And so, first of all, when we talk about the work that I do resilience work. And the good news is for some of you on this call who work in schools, resilience, the protective factors learning supports are, yes, they're correlated to resilience. You will bounce back. You're more likely to bounce back if you have a web of support. But that's correlated to school success and student achievement and avoiding risk behaviors, drugs and alcohol, suicide, and getting out of jail and not being a recidivist, not going back to jail after you've been in youth detention. So first of all, what I went looking for in my data sets in Alaska in the 1990s was how do we have kids see more choices? My first grants were suicide prevention grants. Alaska had the highest teenage suicide rate in planet Earth, and we had kind of given up. That's not really fair to say, but we didn't have any new ideas. And I can, for those of you into suicide prevention, we can talk at length someday. Call me. I can tell you some crazy things we did that didn't have any effect, and I can also tell you some things that we had great effect. Alaska's suicide rate has gone down. It's still high. It's fifth in the United States, 5th out of 50 states. but it used to be number one, and it was by far number one. And so we're moving in the right direction in Alaska. It's correlated to, we wanted kids, because they don't have choices, right? 10 options are better than 9. 100 options are better than 99. 170 options are better than 165. We wanted kids to also do well in school, because doing well in school, reading, writing, and doing math is equated to options in the West, especially, but really around the world. In any country I work in, being more able to reason makes you more resilient. And of course, civility. Can you get along with your neighbors, right? Can you get along? Doesn't mean you need to love them, but can you get along? Can you be in a country, in a community, in a school board meeting together? Number 3, the ability to bounce back from adversity and learn from their mistakes. Can you have your heart broken and bounce back? And then my favorite quote, my favorite standard actually came out of Southeast Alaska, right down by Ketchikan, so right north of Prince Rupert for you guys and who know your West Coast. This was from an elder in a 2-day training where 260 members of the village showed up on a sunny weekend in Southeast Alaska, which is almost unheard of. 260 people and he said that the chief said to live, love, connect, participate, and contribute well. That's what he wanted out of the web of support. And so RED, we've talked about RED, the rule of 5, okay? But the rule of 5 is really the power of more. In my data sets, I have a lot of kids with 0. I won't at first, I will be honest with you. But my record is in a small village in Tennessee was a girl with 27. Think of how strong that girl's web was with 27. You suppose anybody was worried about her not doing well in school? No. Suppose anybody was worried about her falling through the cracks? No, right? Rule of 5, power of more. Back in the day, I was competing with some people back in the 90s who would, it takes a whole village to raise a child. It takes a whole village to raise a child. And when I would get up in front of the room, I would have data that said it doesn't take a whole village. And oh my word, guys, it was like, they would label me as a arch conservative and buying into all kinds. I said, why? I'm just a data guy. I'm telling you, it does not take a whole village to raise a child. But every kid in my data, every single youth and child need a personal village. Well, some people in the audience would go, well, that's what we meant. That's what we mean when Derek, that's what we mean when we say every kid, it takes a whole village. It doesn't sound like that. It sounds like you can release your child into Calgary and your child's going to be okay. Someone's going to just pick them up, like you'd leave the keys in your car. It takes a whole village. It takes all Calgary to make sure that my car is gassed up and windows are rolled up and tuned up. No, somebody needs to take some shared responsibility for that car. For that child. And so when we started with our data sets measuring a personal village, guess what? The village woke up to what their job was. Call it a clan, call it a network, call it a tribe, call it a family, whatever you call it, whoever you are, you need one. So who are these people in this red? So our data sets show that the most, shouldn't surprise anybody, biological and adoptive family members are the most frequent adults listed as anchors in their web. The second most likely people to appear are friends of the family, friends of those anchors. And many of you on this call, you can remember that your dad's friends or your mom's friends were significant in your life. You might even call them uncle or your fake uncle or your false uncle. Or there's all cultures have words for non-bio or non-adoptive adults in our life. We all have vernacular for that. The third most likely, people inside of a school building. Teachers, bus drivers, food service workers, custodians. In Alaska, I'm very proud to say this, we have more schools named after custodians than we have named after superintendents. Not saying superintendents aren't important. It's just that when the community thinks about who is important in their life and we should name a school after, the custodian was usually there every day for all of their growing up. So in the state of Alaska right now, we have 13 schools named after custodians and 0 named after superintendents. I love that. That's how it should be. It's because people are saying that custodian was one of my 5, right? Members of a church, synagogue, temple, or mosque. Think about it. Where are kids going to find these adults if they're not going to some kind of intergenerational faith community, some kind of intergenerational meeting where connection can happen? Volunteer youth program leaders and staff. That would be like a big brother, big sister. That would be volunteer coaches, hockey coaches, baseball coaches, softball coaches, dance, volunteer native dance. And then this is the hard one for me. And this one we learned in early 2000s was paid youth program providers were the least likely to appear in a kid's web than anybody. And I'll be honest with you guys in Alberta that this one shocked me and it scared me. Because in the state of Alaska, we thought we could fund our way out of this disconnected youth mess. And we thought if we started building boys and girls clubs around the state, and we did, trust me, and getting more program providers, more social workers in schools, not saying those things are bad. It's just that it didn't increase the thickness of the web. It didn't do what we thought it was going to do. We thought it would build the web. And we can talk about that a little bit later if you're interested about what we learned about. Remember, I was on the board of directors of a teen club in the state capital, and I was the president of that board for 4.5 years. So I can tell you what we did in our staff to make sure that my staff showed up on kids in kids lists, and it works. It just it's hard. I'll just tell you, and we learned a lot. So this is an interesting slide. Look at these percentages. 37% of the names are from the family. Many times when I show this slide, people go, I thought that number would be closer to 70% or 65%. No, 37%. Well, let's just show we're looking for 5. If we were looking for 2, maybe we would have more, right? A family member. So, but we're looking for 5, right? 5 or more. The second most likely, friends of the family. So family and friends of the family, those two numbers together are 58%, and it's social capital. So in the West, we all talk about financial capital. We all want more money. We want more money we want our property values to go up. We want our stock and bonds to go up. We want more money. We want more money. But social capital is also just as important, and in some cultures more important than dollars. And look at what's happening. People, 58%, if you have high social capital, you can share it with your kids. You can share it with other people's kids. You can share it with the community. If you don't have high social capital, it falls on to, look at the next number, 20%. Schools, school teachers, social workers in schools, coaches in schools, bus drivers, school secretaries appear on kids' list, 20%. 13% in church, synagogue, temple, or mosque. 6% volunteers, youth leaders who don't get paid. Some of you in this call, have you ever had a kid say, you only care about me because you're paid? I say, no, I don't. Right now, I love you because I love you. And I get paid sometimes, but I don't get paid to love you. I love you because I love you. Finally, number 3, 3% paid. No, I really don't love you. I'm only here because they're paying me. You're right, you crazy kid. I'm only here because they're paying me. I want another job. I want to get out of this work, right? So in my work, we talk about 3 families. There's the family you're given. We were all born into a family, and most religions on this world by far believe that your birth was an accident. Poof, you showed up someplace, right? And then there's a family with a PH, because not only who you were born to is an accident, when you're a little child, you don't get any vote in where you were born, or where your first early childhood experiences were. My parents were Bureau of Indian Affairs teachers in a Lakota village called Cannonball over on the Missouri River over here in central North Dakota. I didn't choose to be spend the first years of my life in Cannonball. But where you grow up matters, right? Where you grow up matters a lot. And thank God I did. Thank God I had that early on. It informed my life. But I didn't choose that. That was that my parents chose that. And then finally, when I became 15, or when our children become 14, 15, they get to be creators of their web. They get to choose their anchors. And this is hard on some of us on this call. Some of our moms and dads who used to be chosen. Guess what? A kid starts to individuate. They're not us. They don't want us anymore as one of their five. They put us at a distance, and all of a sudden you'll hear, Mom, I just got some great advice from this coach. And you'll go, I've told him that same advice 20 times. Trouble is, it's the coach who has the connection right now, and that's how you catch the string. And so in this work of Seeing in Full Color, rather than being angry at the coach or feeling possessive, like, no, that coach shouldn't be teaching my kid, we might want to write that coach a thank you note saying, thank you, right? Like, my kid's caught the string that you threw, and that's one I wanted him to catch for a long time. PH. Derek, why do you use PHs? It drives me crazy. I'm an English teacher. I can't stand it. Or I'm a professional. You can't just change words. Here's why we have a family with a PH. Because I tell my kids, my guys, and I have for 40 years, I love you. Now, the Western culture is so eroticized love that I had to explain it, because kids would go, that's weird. I said, it isn't weird. There's 7 kinds of love that the Greeks identified. Eros is one of them, and I don't eros you, but I do love you, because to be safe, we'll just call it Philadelphia, philia. I love you like a brother, like a little sister, right? I love you. Oh, so it's not weird? No, love isn't weird. It's just brother-sister love, brotherly love. And so when we learned this data, I went around, especially Alaska, and I was trying to find a word that would describe who these anchors were to kids. And we looked for native words. We looked for American Indian, First Nations words. We tried to do neologisms, create new words. Nothing stuck. And we're in a village of Huslia with about 70 kids and some adults, about 90 people, 70 kids and 20 adults, I'll say. And we are in small groups. We're working this out. I mean, most of this framework, the kids taught me. And a boy, a young man stands up, 17-year-old boy, says, Derek, it's a family with a PH. And the room, you guys, broke out into like spontaneous joy. And the kids, the boys got in the middle of the jump circle on the gym. This is a northern school. And they were doing a basket dance, and they were beating their feet on the floor and said, family, family, family. And I'm like, yep, that's it. Because there's no other word for it, guys. Everybody wants a family. And if you speak English or Spanish, La Familia, it's a La Familia with a PH, with a PH, see? Porque there are no other words. There are no other words. And when kids started saying, that's the PH, that's the love family, Derek. That's what you always say. The PH love. That's what you always say. It's a PH family. That's an honest to God story. It's one of my favorite. I love that story. Here's how to connect someday. We can talk about that. We can talk about this someday. So while we were doing our research, because I went to grad school, like all y'all, you're taught in statistics that everything you measure breaks into a bell curve, aren't we? I mean, everyone on this call who's gone to grad school or had an undergrad, you're taught that everything you measure breaks out into a bell curve. That's just one of the rules. Well, when we started measuring, we thought, well, if the magic number is 5, or the trigger number, the tipping number is 5, then most kids will have 3. They'll be in the middle somewhere. And here's what we found out. The data I'm going to show you is in British Columbia, a few schools in Alberta, a lot of schools in Alaska, a lot of schools in Arizona, Tennessee, and others. But here we go. We found an hourglass on its side, and this should be no surprise to anybody on this call. We found out in our data sets that 0 to 2 anchors, adults, 37% have 0, 1, or 2 adults in their life. 3 to 4 adults in the middle, right? And 42% of the kids have 5 or more, 5 all the way up to 27. Why is this significant? Because we don't only have a divide of class, of money in the pocket in Canada and the US that's growing. We have a divide of social capital. We have kids who don't have as much social capital as a whole group of other kids. And who do you suppose is faring better? Who is less likely to fall through the cracks? You already know the answer to that. The kids who are thickly webbed. Social capital is just as important, and in some communities more important than financial capital. Kids with this is really from our data sets from back in the early 2000s. This is a page of a book I can send you if you're interested. Matter of fact, on that we have on my laptop the ministry back in 2007 and 8. We were going to write a book together, and so I still have it. We just never, you know how governments change, and I went away. The book went away, but I still have pieces of it that Albertans wrote. Factor orange, tangible supports. The only thing I want you to remember is that the tangible supports, you can feel them, you can touch them. They're easy to measure. They're easy to measure, and they come from relationships. They come through connection. Okay? You can't have caring and you can't feel good about your school unless you're connected to adults inside that school. That is our data. Kids don't care about the new carpet. They don't care about the walls. They care about the relationships and connections that happen inside that school. That's how you get the protective factor of caring and connected school. When your child comes home, a kid you're working with says, I hate school, I will guarantee that they don't have a positive connection with any adult in that school, from a bus driver to food service workers to superintendent secretary. There's no connection there. Kid says, I love school, I'll guarantee that they are very connected to a whole bunch of people inside that building. Factor yellow, intangibles. We talk a lot in Canada and the US about, the declining Canadian values, the good old days. Back when Canadians didn't have to lock their doors, you could let your car idle in the parking lot in Edmonton. And let's face it, you still can, Canada, but we can't do that as much down here in the lower 48 anymore. But things are shifting. We all acknowledge that things are shifting, right? So where did you catch your courage? Who did you catch your courage from? Who did you catch your integrity from? Your honesty, your positive view of personal future, your compassion, your desire to give. You didn't get it out of thin air. You didn't get it out of a YouTube video or a TikTok. You got it because somebody who cared about you, that you had a connection with, threw you that string, modeled it, taught it, and you caught it and you held it. Therefore, you have these values. I showed you a slide with an hourglass on its side. 37% of people in the West, at least in our data sets, don't have enough people in their lives who have caught the very values that we all think that they should have. And so what we think we should do is go start cramming values down their throats with better curriculum and better programs, and when in fact they're not going to catch it because there's no connection unless that program developer is way highly connected. Then go for it. But if we're all in Arizona or Florida or Oklahoma, if we're just trying to cram values down a kid, it's going to have no effect. It might even have a backlash. We might even be surprised what we get. These intangibles are virtues, values, attitudes, behaviors, actions. They're caught by the teenager from relationships. So when I'm in the West, and this happens in Honorary a lot, up in their school, I know for a fact, and instead of asking a kid, how are you today? That's a very balloon question. You can ask, how's your net working for you? How's your web working for you? And this webinar is about mental health, right? How's your web working from you is a great mental health question. Because COVID, I don't know about you guys, but it sure shifted the web in my head, right? But the fact that I can't go out and see my folks, that I can't go out and give hugs, that I can't go out and see my kids, like my world has shifted and I feel it. I feel it socially, my web, and that as that web has shifted, it shifted the web in my head. My web, actually, you asked my wife, 9 months ago, my web wasn't working very well for me, right? My network wasn't working very well for me. What's your net worth? I have a whole bunch of, especially men, right? I got a bunch of men. They're gonna get a lot of money. They're gonna get a lot of money, right? Good on them. Financial capital is important in the West, but man, are they lonely, right? So I ask them, "What's your net worth?" And they all want to give me a number, and I want to hear how thick their web is. Matter of fact, I'm flying to, honest to God, I'm flying to LA next week to actually have this conversation with 5 of my men friends about our net worth, about our social capital, and how to share that with the world. The picture on your right is the governor of the state of Alaska. He's holding up the web. We've done this with tribal chiefs in South Africa. We've done this all over the world. At first, some people, I have a great story in South Africa where there was a tribal leader there, and his entourage with glasses and Uzis, and said, the chief will not be playing with balloons. The chief will not be playing. I said, chief can do whatever he wants. He doesn't have to play with balloons. Well, you can imagine, chief loves kids, and pretty soon he's bopping balloons and he's holding up the web and the web of support, and I got guys with the Uzis running around the room. I'm thinking someone's gonna die, right? But chiefs play. Fishermen in Southeast Alaska, oil workers on the slope, including up in Inuvik. I had oil workers up there. They were all in. They were all playing web of support. You all know what happens as you build the web of support. The good stuff goes up. Kids are more likely to thrive. I can spend a little time on data on this if you want me to, but you can look to corroborate. Search Institute Developmental Assets, Hawkins and Catalano's Communities That Care model, Carol Gilligan's work on girls. Who else has got great? Emmy Werner, The Children of Kauai, Protective Factors. UCLA, University of California, Los Angeles, their work with learning supports. Their lists are almost all the same, the little subtle differences, but they all give the same data outcomes. If you build the web, the good stuff happens. And if you don't, right? And if you don't build the web, the bad stuff happens. And if you build the web, the bad stuff is less likely to happen. That's what this says. If you build the web, you're less likely to fall through the cracks. Like, I know you see it, but like, wow. This is Search Institute data. They're my favorite. I think Peter Benson was brilliant in the way that he looked at protective factors and learning supports, and he was doing his work in the 70s and 80s. And you've got I just had a call with the founder of Positive Peer Culture, Larry Bentro last week. I've known him since my time at the Reformatory in Minnesota, and positive peer culture. So his data is the same stuff. You add these protective factors, and the good stuff happens. The bad stuff tends to go away. So correlation between anchors and strings. The more relationships you have, the more strings you're likely to have. That shouldn't be surprising. Between ROI, red, orange, yellow, and resilience, the more web you have. We teach that the web is three things, you guys. We teach that it's a safety net. That's what the data I just showed you. But you know what? That's not enough. I mean, I didn't get into my line of work to stop kids from doing drugs. Do I want them not to do drugs? Duh. I've never done drugs in my life. I'm curious, but I have never done them yet. Do I want my kids to do it? No, right? But I don't talk about, many times I'll go into a school, Derek, you didn't even mention not doing drugs. I mentioned scissors cuts. Like, if you have a thick web, why would you do drugs and erode the very thing you would probably die for? You don't, right? You're not going to you don't want to disappoint people who love you. There's a correlation between strings and thriving and between strings and risk behaviors. Factor green, growing the balloon. 5, so we do measure innate resilience. We've linked it to the 5 personality types. You all know that. They're kind of what the Western psychologists say are the probably most innate personality characteristics. You can Google it. The big five personality characteristics. But we had to make it understandable to young people, to middle school and high school kids. So when our data set was done, it was done on gender. Gender, when I did my data set, was more binary than it is today. Today it's on a spectrum. Good on us. Way to go, world. Girls tend to be bigger balloons than boys. Does not mean all girls are bigger balloons than all boys. It does not mean it's easier to be a girl than a boy. What it means is that a girl is more likely to stay on any web that they have than a boy is likely to stay on any web that he has. That's all that means. Does not mean, and for those of you who are doing youth trafficking, sex trafficking, those of you who are looking at some of the nightmares that our young women are put through, if you look at it at a full color lens and understand the web of support and the social transactions and what it means to be a female in the Western culture, and perhaps DNA, because it seems to be global, this phenomena, is that girls are more likely to stay even connected to webs that hurt them than a boy. Positive social orientation. It does not mean gregarious. It does not mean, what's the Myers-Briggs, extrovert. The West loves extroverts. They all think that extroverted kids are bigger balloons than kids who are introverts. No, that's not how it works. Kids who are pro-social, all pro-social means is I'll come in the room and not hyperventilate. I'll be okay in the room, right? That's what pro-social means. I'm okay, right? Matter of fact, I've got there was some folks who said, well, shyness makes you a smaller balloon. We spent a lot of money and a lot of time trying, because I work with First Nations kids who tend to be more who tend to be more reticent, and you think, well, shyness maybe makes them a little bit smaller balloon. No, absolutely not. Matter of fact, shyness, some of my shyest kids, when they start building their webs, what you'll notice is their web is actually thicker. It's just they have fewer 5. They maybe have 5 or 6 caring adults and not have 15, right? Because they'll have deeper ties to the kids that to the adults that they anchor them. Faith and wonder. I'm going to go quickly here. Kids who have a bigger view, wonder about why we're here, tend to be bigger balloons than kids who say what you see is what you get. Optimism. Martin Seligman's work in Learned Optimism, Grit, Eleanor Duckworth, good work. Those are brilliant people. We see that they're more, that there's a seed of that inside people, and it's like a dimmer switch, a light bulb on a dimmer switch, and you can only make some kids so gritty, right? You can't. every kid isn't a 150 watt light bulb. Some kids are 60 watt, 100 watt light bulbs. And so our work is it's kind of in, the best way I can describe it here for you all is in epigenetics. Epigenetics puts our DNA on a dimmer switch, not on a light switch, right? On off isn't how it works. It's on a dimmer switch. And then, of course, valued and identified talents or intelligences. So, adverse childhood experiences. You notice there wasn't a color for that. And I was surprised, like maybe many of you were, that ACEs have come up in our world. And I knew kids were hurt. So did all you. Like, duh. However, there must have been some people in our midst who didn't know that kids were hurt. And so they've been counting ACEs. And ACEs are sinkers. And they're like fishing lures that go inside the balloon. And the way we teach it is kids do know their ACEs, but kids get to choose the size of their ACE. So if they have 6, they get to, there's many different sizes of sinkers. Because, some kids will not choose any sinker for one of their ACEs, whereas the survey may say kids got 6. One of them, dad was incarcerated, is a sinker, and mom and dad got divorced, a sinker. Well, I'll have kids say, Derek, do I have to pick one? No. My dad going to jail was the best thing that ever happened to me. No, you don't have to pick one. Or my parents getting divorced, I don't think it's a sinker at all. I think we're working it out. Then it's not one, right? I do not let the survey drive my kids' pain. I let my kids, in the context of their own understanding of the web of support, tell me what their pain is and put it in context inside their balloon. Because their sinkers don't change their balloon or doesn't change their web. Their sinkers just make them a little heavier. And then it gives my kids a way forward, because some people doing adverse childhood experiences and trauma are telling my kids that they're going to have less interesting lives, or more lives of more hardship, which is not true. It's a lie. When in fact my kids need a way forward. So they either thicken their web or grow their balloon, or both. And my kids love that, and they get on it. My guys get on it. It increases their self-agency. They can do this themselves. You all know the trauma sinkers. Remember, mental health, the web that you're from informs the web of support in your head. The love that you've been given, the dose, dopamine, oxytocin, serotonin, endorphins, the chemicals inside your brain that connect the dendrites and axioms and make you who you are, your brain was informed by the web of support that you came from and the web of support that you have today. I know it's not a surprise to those of you on this call, but it's a surprise to many, many Westerners. Factor blue, scissors cuts. There are things that happen to the kid and things that the kids do themselves that erode this web. And we try really hard to get kids to understand that we tell kids avoid crystal meth. Well, duh. But don't avoid crystal meth because it makes your teeth fall out. Avoid crystal meth because it'll turn you into a monster and you'll blow up your web. That's why you don't do crystal meth. And the sad part of giving that message is when I did it back in the 90s and early 2000s, because I stopped doing it that way, I'd look in that audience of teenagers and I'd know in my heart that 30 to 40% of them didn't have a web enough to disappoint. So Derek doesn't work for me. I know those kids aren't going to do crystal meth because their web would blow up on them. They don't want to give that up. It'd be like burning money. But my Finley Web kids, they got nothing to lose. Indigo, caring for the carers. You guys, in my work, we teach kids not to have to web you up yet because they're still teenagers in the West. But they're going to become part of your anchors real soon. As soon as they turn the age of majority, they are welcome. When they turn that tassel over in a Western graduation ceremony, that means I was the recipient of a web. Now I am a fellow contributor of a web, right? And so I'm anchored by many by many young people. If they were on this call, they would tell you. They used to ask me back in the day, Derek, why do you care about us so much? Because someday you're going to employ me. No, really, why do you care so much? Because someday you're going to employ me. I can tell you that I've got my kids on my board of directors. They're not kids anymore. They're in their 40s. I got kids who've risen into state and provincial government, and they fund me. I am here because of my kids, right? Community normals, right? What's the wins? What's happening around us? Economy and jobs, the acceptance of drugs and alcohol. What's the win? The normalization of sexual harm, right? What wins? What bad and good wins are flowing around us? 8% of students entering schools feel good about themselves. By the end of 5th grade, only 20% do. Webs of supports are safety nets. Webs of support are filters, like a dream catcher. And you need a dream catcher, a filter, to filter out all the muck and mire in the newspaper, on the internet, maybe in your family, in your neighborhood. As Western kids go through school, we tend to, professional educators, we tend to say things like, you're not in elementary school anymore. You had a really thick web back there, but now you're going to be more balloon. And when you get to high school, it's all balloon. I'm not your daddy. I'm not your mom. I know. You need to do it. You need to suck it up. The trouble with that is the kids who were getting their anchors from the school system, from the community, when they were elementary, right? Why didn't we just keep, because the kids who were successful got to keep their web birthed through graduation. The kids who were not successful, we webbed them up heavily at elementary level, and then we slowly eroded the dang thing underneath them, and we wondered why they're falling through the cracks now. It's because they didn't see in full color. They didn't see the web. The web of support is a better predictor of student performance than gender, family income, race, or family composition. The relationship between strings, protective factors, and learning supports is similar for both females and males. The more strings females and males have, the more likely they are to have higher GPAs. Purdue School of Engineering, Honors School of Engineering. Why was I there? Because they were having female students not enroll in their program, and when they would enroll, they would have them drop out and take a year off and go to MIT or Caltech or someplace else, and they were wondering why, what's happening here at Purdue that isn't happening at MIT or other places. And it's the web. Because what happened at Purdue, and we had to make some adjustments over 5 years, is that there were little tiny jokes, little tiny scissors cuts, little tiny innuendos that girls couldn't do as well as boys in these math and science classes, which is a joke, which is ridiculous. There's nothing biological, right? And so once we got that turned around, guess what? Right now at Purdue University Honor School of Engineering, it's 50, I think it's 48-52, 48 female, 52 male. But that's pretty dang good, right? Surround a kid with anchors who say, this is what you can do, and ideally have a couple women PhD engineers in their web, and they say, this is what I do, right? This is what I do. We can do this. That we pronoun is a powerful thing in web building. Family poverty is a predictor of low student achievement. Duh. Poverty sucks the life out of you. It's hard to be poor. Yet, strings, the web, are a better predictor of student academic success than income level. Poor people love their kids too. And just because you're rich, there's my doorbell, just because you're rich doesn't mean that you have a web. And I work in some of the wealthiest communities and neighborhoods and for sure British Columbia and the United States. And they're always like, I give my kid everything except a web, right? Except a web. Race. European American. I could also say this would be good for European Canadian kids. 5.8%, 5.8 times more likely to be successful in kid than a thinly webbed European Canadian kid. First Nations kid, 3.8 times more likely to be successful in school than a thinly webbed First Nations or Aboriginal kid in Canada. Multiracial Canadian, 5.4 times more likely. African Canadian, 4.0 times more likely. Hispanic Canadian, 5.6 times more likely. Asian Canadian, 3.9% more likely. We did this work back in the mid-2000s in Richmond, BC, when all the folks from Hong Kong were coming over. And I have great stories from how we were taking schools with these new immigrants to Canada to say, you got a lot of money, and this is how we web up here in Richmond. And it worked. It mattered. Tightly webbed youth from single-parent families are 13 times more likely to be successful in school than those who are loosely webbed. Tightly webbed youth from single-parent families are 13 times more likely to succeed in school than those who are loosely webbed. Well, you know the story, right? Because of 5 and of strings you catch. If you're a single-parent mom or dad, you don't have the social capital of your own to share, and you're not too sure about the school taking your kid, and you've tried to be everything for your kid. You've not shared them with other adults who can be one of their 5. Your kid is going to have a tougher time than if you're a single parent that says, my kid can find a web out there on my reserve, in my neighborhood, in my school, in this youth program, in my church, synagogue, temple, or mosque. Furthermore, while 42% of loosely webbed youth from single-parent families have problems in school, 0 of the tightly webbed youth from single-parent families reported having similar problems. When I showed this slide to community nights around the world, single parents will oftentimes get tears in their eyes, like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know the web, but I did it right. Or, oh my gosh, I wish I would have known this 15 years ago. Where were you then, right? Still tears. Just some are happy and some are sad. The wisdom of the elders has stood the research test of time. That's a Yupik elder said that quote back in the 90s to me at a big, said that's, he was saying that's what we were looking for. He says, Derek, what you're looking for is traditional native knowledge, and traditional native knowledge is Norwegian, and it's Scottish, and it's Irish, and it's Bushman of the Kalahari. I've worked there. It's in Zimbabwe. It's everywhere. It's just that we forgot. We have to remember attached to each other. We need to remember ourselves into a community, because that's how we got here. I'm going to show you, I only got a few minutes of your time. This always goes so fast for me. It's probably hope for you. You ever heard that expression that every kid's got a deal, play the hand they've been dealt? Oh, we love that saying. Got to play the hand you've been dealt. So here's a card game. Let's say we're playing hearts, right? Here's a kid with a snapshot at the top left. He's competing with the kid on the top right. Here, look at this kid. He's just got his hand dealt. And look at this. These kids, here's a bunch of snapshots. Look at we can start judging, making assessments about these kids. Ooh, look at that kid's got a thin web over there. If you look on the left side of your screen, the one in the middle, look at that thin web. Oh, look at the thick web, the top right or the bottom left. Whoo, wow. Before you get caught up in the web of support, you need to know that what I've just shown you on this slide is the same kid who's been in my life from 8th grade to his senior year. And he's allowed me to use his data. And I'm telling you that where he ended up is not in the thickest one necessarily, but he understands that as life happens to him, his web shifts. Therefore, he has to make accommodations. And this young man can literally, someday I should tape this with him. He can sit down and use these snapshots, and he can tell you and me what was going on in his life then. It's like a journal. He knows this work so well. So do all my kids. We use it all the time. I just want to burn in the fact that this is the same kid. And the good news is the range was always increasing because that was our goal. I never told him to get to a thick web and hang on, because that ain't how it works. Because surprises happen, divorce, death, economy shift. But you always in the back of your mind know that it's not me, that my web is shifting. It's mental health. I can do something to reweave myself into the world. You guys, this is my intellectual property, and I'm very honored to give you this webinar. I would love to have you trained in my work and do this work well. I've given you enough information to be dangerous. And so go out there, practice telling the napkin talk. But if you want more, let's go for it. I'm 60. And if this is the program that goes away, because what do you replace it with? If the web of support is the building blocks of a kid's life, and it's how they become a human being, Yuyurok in Yupik country in Alaska, Yuyurok, how a person becomes a human being, what do you replace it with? So gosh, I don't ever want to hear, oh, I work in a youth program and we tried web of support, but it didn't work. That would be a lie. Because when it's not a program, it's not something you try, it's something that's happening all around you, whether you like it or not. So our work does have programmatic elements. We do have lessons and curriculum. What's most important is we want what's invisible to be made visible in kids' life and in your life. Wow. So I'm at 2:00. And I'm I wish I had more time with all of y'all. We've done this training up in Alberta for 4 days. In Edmonton and Calgary, high level. Up in Lac La Biche, we did it for 4 days. If you're interested, you know you can always call Andy or Al or Sarah or the folks here. They can help you out. From my culture, to you, Al, thank you for 3 things. Thank you for your time. I know you didn't need to be here. I sure appreciate it. Thank you for your participation if you were taking notes and doing something about this work. And finally, thank you for your attention. Your attention is the most valuable thing you have on planet Earth. Please pay more attention to the kids around you and their web of support. Thanks, you guys.
Thank you to Derek, and thank you to everybody who joined us today. That was really inspiring, and there's a lot of amazing comments in the chat and also in the Q&A. So sorry we didn't get to all the questions, but really, Derek, you answered everything so succinctly and so passionately. So thank you for that passion and that attention that you're sharing with all of us. So we definitely would like to hear from you. So please, check out our social media, take a look at the AMP website. So here we have up on the screen, we have our newsletter. So definitely take a look at our newsletter, subscribe to it, and get more information. See when we're bringing Derek. Derek's mentioned coming back again. I want to talk to him about some more of his work, and the work that you're doing out there in your communities is also very inspiring. So thank you all for taking the time today. Thank you, Derek, for your wisdom and sharing it with us and passing that along. And thanks to the team, Andy, Sarah, Tanya, Rochelle, and our great leadership committee, executive team. Some great work going on here, and we thank Derek for that work, doing that work in tandem with us. So have a wonderful day, and take care, everybody.